The reason I want to share with you that brief story, because I think it ties right into the importance of India as I think about the geopolitical priorities for the United States. John Chambers is a very dear friend of mine. Many of you know John. He's been very active in the U.S.-India Strategic Partnership Initiative. In fact, I was on the phone with John just this weekend talking about India, believe it or not. But when I go to India versus when I go to China, let me just give you a stunning contrast. I was in Beijing 2 weeks ago. I led a bipartisan group of senators to Shanghai and Beijing the week before President Trump and the team were with Xi Jinping and the premier. We met with the premier, we met with Wang Yi, the foreign minister. It was a historic summit with senators prior to the president being there. But when I go to China, this phone stays on my desk in Washington. When I go to India, this phone goes with me. In fact, I was there in January. I was Ambassador Sergio Gore's very first congressional delegation. My wife and I went there just a couple of weeks after Sergio had made to his post. In fact, we stayed with him in his residence. But I told the Indian government, we had a meeting with Dr. Jay, with Minister Goyal. The Prime Minister was out at that time. I said, you've got a really special ambassador here because he's excited about India. If you've talked to Sergio at all, he loves being there. He sees all the opportunities there. And he's also a half a phone call away from President Trump. That's what you want from an ambassador. Access to the president and passion for the country. And that's Sergio. But on the trust pieces, I emphasize that to my Indian friends. When I was over there in January, we were in a bit of a little friction. That's being, I think, probably gracious about terms as being more of a diplomat here today. And I heard directly from our Indian partners and friends, both at the government level and in the business community, about this impasse that we had. And we worked it diligently. I came back to Washington, and 2 weeks later, President Trump, Prime Minister Modi came together and said, it's 18% and let's move forward. That was a very important step in the relationship. We didn't need this kind of friction, in my opinion, with one of the geopolitically most important relations we have, and that's between the United States and India. George Shultz has a famous line on trust. George Shultz once said, when trust was in the room, good things happened.
Being introduced by my father, when you get to a certain point in politics, they omit all your failures, other than Swadesh. He recites them all, but he is a great mentor to so many of us. I know Ambassador Rich Verma will say that when I started out in politics and interned for Kathleen Kennedy Townsend, a very well-meaning policy director said, well, bro, you're really passionate about politics. This was 2001, about your Indian American and your Hindu faith. You'll never get elected to anything, but you should go work on Capitol Hill. And then Obama happened, and it changed things. But back then, Swadesh was one of the very few people who would say, you keep at it, you keep working. This country will make space for you. And he saw Rich Verma be appointed to ambassador. He saw me win for Congress. He saw many people. And he also brought something that transcends the U.S.-India relationship, although we could use now, when he spoke to Jesse Helms, someone who was clearly racist, and someone who had beliefs rooted in the segregated South. But Swadesh talked to him about India, and he convinced him that he should not have negative feelings towards India. And to me, that type of leadership, believing in the redemptive possibility of people, is so needed today in our country, not just on India, but more generally. So I'm a big admirer of Swadesh, and here at his invitation, and to say he was an original trailblazer when it comes to the Indian American community and the U.S.-India relationship. Let's give him a round of applause. I'm also a big admirer of Deborah Ross. You have an incredible incredible congresswoman. We traveled in India together, and Deborah was the most energetic travel companion I've ever had. Sometimes I'd say have another meeting with, boring statistics, and Deborah would be asking questions despite the jet lag, just a real love for India, for the culture, for the people. And she is so respected in the Congress because she's liked by every faction of our caucus. She's a bridge builder, a coalition builder. She works with Republicans. She gets things done. And it's really an asset to have her in the Congress, in her leadership, but also to be such a champion of the U.S.-India relationship. And I've mentioned Rich a couple times, but he's got a huge future in foreign policy, so I appreciate all his work. Let me be brief on the U.S.-India relationship. All of you care about the relationship. You know about the relationship. You know about the trade ties, the defense ties. But I want to talk about something slightly different. It's not what the U.S.-India relationship will be. It is what is the values that will undergird the U.S.-India relationship. Are we going to have a relationship grounded in our ideals of pluralistic, multiracial democracy, moving the nations of the world towards a respect for people of all different faiths, towards a respect for people of different backgrounds, moving the world towards international cooperation as opposed to just militarism? Or are we going to form an alliance of convenience based on nationalism, based on simply containing other countries, based on an inward-looking patriotism that is not in the best definitions of our founding ideals? I believe India's destiny was framed by Gandhi and Nehru. It was a destiny back then. I said this to the Prime Minister. He kind of winced. I said, Mr. Prime Minister, you're the fifth largest economy, but they respected Gandhi more. There's still not streets named after you like they're named after Nehru, because they captured the imagination of the world because of their commitment to human rights, because of their commitment to pluralism, because of their commitment to the Enlightenment ideals. And same with the United States. People who captured our spirit, Lincoln and FDR and W.E.B. Du Bois, who of course inspired Ambedkar in India, and King, who was a direct beneficiary of Gandhi. We must, as the United States, build a multiracial democracy and work with India as a multiracial democracy to have that be the alternative model to the rise of authoritarianism and inward-looking nationalism around the world. So of course I'm proud by heritage, but I'm more proud by ideals. And sometimes people say, you're criticizing India on this, or criticizing the United States on this. My North Star is the ideals that at its best define the United States and at its best define India and should define the next generation of our relationship. So with that, Swadesh, thank you for all that you've done. I'm looking forward, I imagine, to hearing that.
Thank you so much for that very kind introduction. And to my friend and constituent, Swadesh Chatterjee, he really, anybody who changed Jesse Helms' mind, he's up there with Bono. The two of them changed Jesse Helms' mind, but both because they were right, they were persistent, and they truly believed that it could get done, as Rode told you. I also cannot tell you how much I enjoy serving with Rokano. We didn't know each other very well. I insisted on going on this trip with him to India. I'll talk to you a little bit about that, but the best part was the first 4 or 5 days when we went to Mumbai and to Hyderabad and got to know each other. And the reason why I was awake, it's my secret thing for when I travel, was every time somebody offered me chai, I said yes. Which meant I was awake, right? And then I got up in the morning and did yoga as I do here in the United States. But Ro has really been a great friend, not just for India, but for so many important things that he has gotten Congress to do at a time when so few people have gotten things done in Congress. I do have some formal remarks, and I'll try to go through them quickly, but I want to also let you know why North Carolina has been such a magnet for the Indian diaspora. So yes, Swadesh convinced Jesse Helms in Washington, D.C., but we had a governor for 16 years who had been in Nepal in the 60s with his entire family, doing agricultural work, doing educational work with the Ford Foundation, and came back, and that was Governor Jim Hunt, who many of you I'm sure know. He's recently passed away, but he came back, and he had a great abiding respect for Nehru. We had North Carolina State University, which had a relationship with India, and he just built on that through our research triangle. I think that conversations like the one that we're having today are essential to strengthening the relationship between our two countries, but the most important thing is that more Americans go to India, because once you go, as you've heard earlier, you have to love the country. The first time I went, I was a young legislator. I told this to Swadesh. I think this is how I got his attention. I went with Kamala Harris. We were a part of a bipartisan group that went to India, and I just could not. I told this to Swadesh. I think this is how I got his attention. I went with Kamala Harris. We were a part of a bipartisan group that went to India, and I just could not stop thinking about what a wonderful experience it was. And as you've heard, India's story and America's story are different, but we share a foundational commitment to democracy and freedom at our best. We're the two world's largest democracies, and that comes with both opportunity and responsibility. The partnership is one of the most important in the world, and it must succeed for the future of democracy and the future of progress. It's beyond Washington, D.C., into communities large and small throughout this country, including a small town in my district, Morrisville, which is 40% South Asian and has a regulation cricket pitch, which I made Ro go to when he came to North Carolina. I'm a representative for the Research Triangle, and I see firsthand how many Indian students enroll in our universities. It's my hope that we can have more American students studying in India, because academic exchange is one of the foundations of our partnership, but it's just the beginning of the story. Every year, thousands of Indians move to the United States or stay in the United States after graduation. Of course, our current government making that harder, and that is a shame. Amazingly talented people lend their talents to American businesses and improve our economy and our communities. Indian Americans, as you all know, have made important contributions, not just to North Carolina and the Research Triangle, but their families and their businesses are part of the DNA of our state and our country. This vital collaboration between our economies is where we see massive progress, as you've heard, in science and technology, shared advancement in biotechnology, and then, of course, in space. It benefits both of our nations, and we must keep a strong, strong link. When we walk together in academics, industry, and cultural exchanges, we can make this world a better place. In Congress, I've worked with Ro and others to lead efforts to end illegal tariffs on India. Well, I'm so glad that this has been a bipartisan endeavor. And last year, I led a bipartisan group of lawmakers in calling on the State Department to address concerns in delay for processing for Indian student visas. Indian students form the largest group of international students in the United States, And these bright students should be able to continue their education and their
I'll just say, we've had a 25-year period of exceptional growth in U.S.-India ties. It would be hard for me to think of another bilateral relationship between the year 2000 and the year 2025 or 2024 that has grown as much and as deep as the U.S. and India. You can't find it. And so that is a great achievement. Now, there's a couple things I would say, like how did we actually do that and why did we do it? The work of Swadesh and Ray and so many others, but we started out in a really difficult period, and they mentioned the 90s. I'd go back to the 70s where President Nixon had really doubled down on Pakistan over India, had used Pakistan as a kind of secret kind of connection to open up doors with China, had been saying a lot of terrible things about India. We really hit a very low point in the relationship. Makes the 90s seem, in sanctions seem somewhat light compared to what we faced in the 70s. But it was President Clinton who in the year 2000 said, I want a different relationship with the country, tasked the National Security Council staff, said, I don't want the hyphen in Indo-Pak anymore. I want a separate relationship with India. I want a separate relationship with Pakistan. And I think this has a really great and promising future, this relationship with India. And that was what led to his trip to India in the year 2000. He led an amazing trip there. He laid out 4 areas of cooperation, 4 areas in a speech to the Indian Parliament. And if you haven't read it, I encourage you to go back to read it, because you're obviously here on a Monday afternoon because you care about U.S.-India relations. So I think this crowd, if any crowd, would read a Clinton speech to the Parliament. But he laid out 4 areas: people-to-people ties, security and defense, trade and economics, and 4th, clean energy. Back in the year 2000, actually talked about the importance of clean energy. And that is largely the 4 pathways that we stayed on in those 25 years. So if you were to just do the math and measure how we did, we went from a few 100,000 visitors from India to the United States to well over 1 million, almost 2 million. We went from $0 in defense trade to over 20 billion, not a single defense exercise, to now India doing the most defense exercises with the United States. We went from nothing on clean energy to signing the Paris Climate Agreement, to the historic U.S.-India civil nuclear deal, and so much more. In fact, I think it's the biggest area of our cooperation going forward. In economics and trade, $0, $200 billion, and not $20 billion in two-way trade to now over $200 billion. So I could go through every category. And you may say, okay, so why does that come to an end? Shouldn't that be another 25 years? And I think what the previous speakers have talked about, and Swadesh and Ray have talked about, is that we're at an inflection point. And I would say it's more than an inflection point. I'd say the system is flashing a bit yellow. Because, one thing that the Prime Minister used to say is that we've overcome the hesitations of history in this relationship. And I think he's right, but we cannot make the same mistakes that we've made in the past. And it feels like we're tripping on our own history and that we're making some of those mistakes. So when I look at those 4 categories, U.S. students are down. The kind of F1 visa, if you were to try to stay in the United States, that's down 50, 60%. People-to-people travel is down 5 to 8%. Anti-Indian sentiment is up dramatically. There was a very interesting study by a very well-regarded research institute that said there were 300 million views of 24,000 posts to X, not of anti-South Asian or anti-minority. And you may say, okay, so why does that come to an end? Shouldn't that be another 25 years? And I think what the previous speakers have talked about, and Swadesh and Ray have talked about, is that we're at an inflection point. And I would say it's more than an inflection point. I'd say the system is flashing a bit yellow. Because, one thing that the Prime Minister used to say is that we've overcome the hesitations of history in this relationship. And I think he's right, but we cannot make the same mistakes that we've made in the past. And it feels like we're tripping on our own history and that we're making some of those mistakes. So when I look at those 4 categories, US students are down. The kind of F1 visa, if you were to try to stay in the United States, that's down 50, 60%. People to travel is down 5 to 8%. Anti-Indian sentiment is up dramatically. There was a very interesting study by a very well-regarded research institute that said there were 300 million views of 24,000 posts to X, not of anti-South Asian or anti-minority, anti-Indian hate. That is a flashing light for me. That is a problem. Go through the other categories. Inexplicably, India ends up with 50% tariffs, higher than China, higher than any other country in the world. That impacts $85 billion of trade coming to the United States, impacts 1% of India's economy. People today still can't explain to me why we would impose those tariffs. Security and defense cooperation, again, I'm concerned about a strategic realignment taking place. And then, of course, climate and clean energy is not a subject that we talk about. So if you ask me, am I concerned? I'm concerned. Do I think we have a really capable team in India? I think we do, and I wish them every success. But I think it's up to this group, if you care about all this progress that's been made by hardworking leaders in the community and the success of the Indian American community in fueling this relationship. And I still have the scars of Swadesh and Ajay Banga and others coming in to talk to me as Senator Reid's foreign policy staffer to get this civil nuclear deal done. One thing I'll say that is often underreported, we went into a rare classified session of the US Senate in the old historic chamber to debate this civil nuclear agreement because why? India had not signed the non-proliferation treaty, and yet we were going to change the rules to allow India to have civil nuclear support and supplies and fuel from India, from the United States. It was the right thing to do, and it showed how much we cared about this relationship. We still care deeply about the relationship, continue to say it's the most important, the most consequential relationship we have. Thank you to all of you.
Next generation is smaller than the generation that we've had at our institutions of higher education. I represent 8 institutions of higher education. They all want more Indian students to be able to come and learn in the United States. I make the argument, and this doesn't rely on Congress to do it, that we need to send more American students to India. And the great thing about it is you speak English in India. So all of these STEM, all of these engineers, all of these mathematicians who are afraid to study abroad because they don't speak the language and they don't know what they're going to do, they could go to India. And so part of what we're talking about with FMC is doing that. But fundamentally, in a bipartisan way, we have to deal with the immigration issue. I know Ami has been doing a lot of work on this. Ami Bera has come in. Everything that I have proposed that would affect Indian students and then H-1B visa holders has been bipartisan and bicameral. And it is only politics that has stopped that. But while we're waiting for the political winds to shift and for the courage to emerge, we can be doing whatever we have in our power to have more students from India come here, more students from the United States go to India, because that is going to build the pipeline for the innovation, for the progress, for the businesses, and for a generation to appreciate the relationship.
As a former Fulbright student, I want to endorse that very much.
I just add a couple things to the conference list. I actually think this is a time for the private sector and for civil society and for academia to actually step up even more than they already are. You know, governments can be out of step with populations, and this may be one of those times where when you look at what's happening in the innovation and research and the joint discovery that's happening between Indian and American companies, medical field, and so many others,